Been here since 2007, and it's been a great experience, and we think we have a wonderful congregation, and we appreciate the women here at the church. And when I saw that David was doing this program, I thought, well, what better place to do a program on Dr. Philhower than in Philhower Chapel. And if you have any doubts, there is a sign as you come in the door on the other side that says Philhower Chapel. So we refer to this in the church as Philhower Chapel. So we thought this would be a great evening to have. So we're glad that you've joined us and that David has come. We've had already some very good conversations. I appreciate that. But David is a lifelong Nutley resident here with his wife Diane. Served in the Nutley Fire Department for 25 years as a lieutenant fire inspector. He served the Nutley Red Cross, the Nutley Family Service Bureau, Nutley Emergency and Rescue Squad, starting in 1975. He's a contributing writer for Nutley Neighbors magazine on various topics. He co-writes and presents Nutley history shows with John Demmer. He's an organic gardener for 40 years and a fly fisherman. He's appeared on Joey B TV and Podcast Nation, Organic Gardening with Inspector Dave, gardening videos and podcasts, NutleyPublicLibrary.org, YouTube videos, various local history talks, and a book based on 40 years of public safety, Fire in Our Lives. He has written with emphasis on fire safety, fire inspectors, and severe weather. Without further ado, here's David.
Okay. Thank you, Reverend Dave. Okay, great to see everybody here tonight. A lot of familiar faces and a few new faces, so it's a good mixed group for me. So the program that we're doing tonight, the first thing I have to do is tell you where the fire exits are. Old fire inspectors never die. So we have an exit out there if something happens, and then of course the way you came in, a direct line down the hallway and out the front are your two ways out. And bathrooms are down the hall too for those who are here for the first time. So feel free. You don't have to raise your hand, you can just get up. It's okay. So this program is about 5 years in the making. The research that we did over the last number of years started with just like one little sentence with Dr. Philhower's name. And then as I did other research on other projects, his name kept coming up. I'm thinking, who's Dr. Philhower? I've never really done any great reading on him. There's no books about him. So we started looking for more and more little details here. And we were able to hook up with some other articles in Ann Troy's book, in the library has some information in their files over there, and we were able also to find believe it or not, the Philhower Family Reunion.org still meets after 250 years. And they have a website. I was able to get in touch with them, and they were able to provide the only really good picture that I have of Dr. Philhower. So it's been taking all that data that we got back then. We wrote a 2-part article for Nutley Neighbors magazine, which a lot of times we do that. That's our introduction to what we're going to be doing. We get all our information together, write an article, it gets published, and then we go the next step, whether it's an outside tour or a program like this. And then tonight we're going to be filming this also. So we have Lou Raffaelli from Lou Raffaelli Visuals is in the back, and he's going to be filming tonight. So eventually this will be edited and it'll be put on the library YouTube channel in their history section. So we'll be able to, people that can't make it tonight or out of the area, it'll be there for them to enjoy also. And it'll be there 20 years from now. So if somebody else decides to do research, then that information will be readily available. So that's one of the things we try to do with all the things we collect. We try to digitize them and share them and get them out into the public so that they're there for the future. They're not just lost in a box in somebody's attic somewhere or on a piece of tape somewhere that's degrading. So we want to make sure that the information is durable and it's out there for everybody to enjoy. So Dr. George Bronson Philhower, he was born out in Croton, New Jersey, which is out near Tewksbury, Hunterdon County, out Route 78. It's about an hour from here. So he was born on a farm out there. And the Philhower family came to this country almost 300 years ago now. They've been here a long, long time. And they kind of owned that area. They owned a lot of acreage out there in Croton. They had farmland out there. There was a lot of Germans in that one area. And they all kind of navigated to that area when they came over here and opened up their farms and stores, and they were really big. And then once, I guess they determined very early on that Dr. Philhower was going to be a shining star in the family because they had private tutors for him. Then he went to Trenton Normal School, and then he went to NYU, and then he got his doctorate of medicine through Bellevue, doing an internship at Bellevue Hospital over there. So he's extremely well educated from a very early age. So this is the second Philhower. This is not the house he was built in, but this is the house that the second house that they built out in that area. So this was in the family, and it's still in the family, believe it or not. There's still Philhower offspring that are living in that house out there, and they're keeping it in the family after all these years. Am I in your way? I see you looking around here. Okay. So the Philhower family actually came here as Woolhower or Volhauer. And as we know, a lot of the names were changed when people went through immigration or when people wanted to Americanize their names. So Volhauer became Philhower. And it's pretty widely adopted across the whole family. They all use that name now. And that's just a coat of arms they made up a couple years ago. So that's Dr. Philhower. This is the fellow we're going to be talking about. This is the only really good picture we have of him. This came from a group picture that was taken here in Nutley at a reunion, and we were able to crop him out and show him. So it's not the best picture, but it's like all we really have of him in terms of clarity. So this is in Tewksbury, this is the family store that they opened up. And it kind of grows. There's a lady sitting up on a roof there. I'm not really sure what she's up there for. I guess she's in charge of security or something. And then they went on to up a general store. And see, there's quite a few. That's all family in that picture, they tell me. So there was a very big operation out there. The families back then usually had 6, 7, 8, 9, 10 kids. It wasn't uncommon, especially if they had farmland and all that, just to have staff to work on the farm. So this is where we talked about this. This is where he went to get his education for his medical degree. And I just show these just because we show him down the bottom here, right in the lower right-hand side. So that's how we were able to get through the archives of the NYU to find out that he actually did go to school there. Because we like to verify all the information that we have. We don't want to just take it for granted because somebody said he went to school there. So we found the programs, and it actually shows him living, in Nutley back then. That's just some pictures of it from the Bellevue Hospital. And then we also found some other information dealing with Leon Kish at the Kingsland Manor, who does a lot of research also. And we found a Kingsland family member that was named Bronson Philhower Booth. And we think, that's an interesting combination of names. You've got the Booth family name, and then you've got Bronson, you got Philhower. So we don't exactly know how that name came to be, but we're thinking that maybe the doc delivered a lot of babies. He was a general doctor, the first one in Nutley, and childbirth was one of the things that he did. And so we think maybe they named the child in his honor after that because he was so well respected. So this is where he lived. We go down to the bottom here. So we don't get this on the screen. That's right. So down the bottom here, this is Whitford Avenue, this is Chestnut, this is Grant Avenue. So the doc was here, was this house here, this big medical building that he had, a one-family house with a big porch, a lot of servants living there, and he owned the property across the street, but it wasn't developed at that time. And we can see it a little more clear on there. It's on the left now on this one. So we have at that point, he built a house there. But the house on the left was where his office was and where he lived there with his kids and his wife. That's the house that's there now on the corner. We've seen that there. A lady used to have a big doll collection, used to live there. Some of you probably know her. And this is where Dr. Philhower's house was. It was demolished a number of years ago, and there's 2 or 3 houses now that are on that property. But it's the corner of Whitford and Grant Avenue. Of course, his neighbor right across the street, Annie Oakley. And he was there at the same time, so he would have had overlap time in the neighborhood, so they knew each other. And his wife and Annie Oakley did pal around together. They were both into horses, and the wife was into equestrian things also. So they have a lot of articles we found that they were together. And there's another picture we just found about a month ago from the Nutley Sun. John Demmer found this with his new microscope. And this is an earlier picture of Dr. Philhower, probably from around 1920, maybe the teens. So a pretty distinguished looking man there, and he had a mustache in all the pictures. And so after he was here only a very short time, he got married. He got into the Rowan family. And the Rowan family, the father was a big Texan, and he owned a hotel on Chestnut Street, which is right where the family service is now, right across the street from them. It was on the corner there. It's been torn down. There's a new building there now. But the Central Hotel, that's what it looked like. That's where the wedding was, and that was considered one of the biggest events of the year, maybe even of the decade. It was a real blowout wedding that they had between the Rowan family and the Philhower family. And that's an interesting operation, because even though it's called the Central Hotel, it was more of a political operation going there, where after the meetings at Town Hall, then people would adjourn there, and that's where the real business got done. Decisions were made there. And then if they rented a room once in a while, I guess that was just gravy money. There was a bowling alley in the back and all. Now, the Women's Club, the reason we have that, that's further down the street right next to the firehouse. And that's where Mrs. Philhower, Louise Philhower, was very, very active back in the 19-teens, 1910s. The Women's Club was gigantic back in terms of membership back then. They had a lot of people. They were involved with quality of life issues in Nutley and just making sure that people were taken care of. They had so many things on their agenda. It's amazing, but the women got things done through that Women's Club back in those days. And at that Women's Club, Dr. Philhower actually ran first aid courses there before the Red Cross even was doing them, because he knew that World War I was going on. There was battles in Europe and all that, and he knew people coming back here were going to need first aid. So he was teaching people prior to the Red Cross even doing it. So he was on the cutting edge. He had a lot of ideas and a lot of energy. In fact, we're going to find out about his energy because he was involved in so many things. What always comes to my mind, where did he get time to get married and have kids? Because he was involved in so many other things. So one of the big things that Louisa was involved in was what's called safe and sane fireworks. Now, it sounds familiar, that phrase, doesn't it? Safe and sane fireworks. That's something we did here in 2010 in New Jersey, using that phrase. Nutley used it in 1923. We were using that same phrase because there were so many injuries going on in town and so much noise from the fireworks back then that the Women's Club was trying to take control of it, getting ahead of the cops and legislatures and everybody else on a local level to get safe and sane fireworks here in town. And she was involved. She was a suffragist too, so she was involved with getting out the women's vote and was on a state level. She was a pretty active lady too. So we're finding more about her as time goes on because we focused on her husband for a long time, and now we're looking more into what did she do also. So we know that she was involved in what's called the Nutley Improvement Association. And they were involved that there were slums in town, which we had in some of the areas in town. They were involved in getting them either cleaned out or getting them demolished, and getting those people relocated. And this is just a stock picture. But he and his wife were one of the first Nutleyites to have bicycles back around 1896. So they were seen tooling around town, doing their thing. So he was not all business. He was fun and games too. And the amateur circus, most of you have probably heard about that. That was held back in 1892 up on the Roach property at the old circus grounds up there. And she was also involved. Like back then, they had a lot of local people that rode horses or had skills, and everybody from Nutley that wanted to could perform at the amateur circus. And that was a big fundraiser for the Red Cross. That's where the first monies came to open up the local Nutley chapter. That's a story in itself. So equestrian prowess was really good. They had what they called gymkhana games back then. And gymkhana games where you rode the horse, you had to be a good rider, but there were skills involved too. You had to maybe ride across the field with a spoon with an egg in it and not drop the egg, or go across with a needle and someone on the other side would be there with a thread, and you have to thread the needle, you have to ride back with it. There'd be a mannequin you could carry across. You could get dressed while you're going across, put a jacket on. It was all like fun stuff, but it was competitive against all the other neighbors. So you had to be able to ride, plus have all these skills too while you were riding and not fall off too many times. People did fall off occasionally. And a lot of those were run right in Nutley, and I have not found out where the Nutley Athletic Club's grounds are. I'm not sure where that was, Si, if you have any clue on that one. The Nutley Athletics Club's grounds. There's somewhere. It had to be a big place for horses and all to run. This is just the articles about that. One person did get hurt on that. Now, baseball, Dr. Philhower in baseball, he was like in love with baseball. That was his hobby on the side. So he went all over the place. But he specifically went to the Park Oval every Saturday afternoon. The office closed. If you got sick or got hurt, sorry, the doc's not here. He's down at the ball game. And he'd be down at the ball game under the trees screaming till he was hoarse because he just loved the baseball games. And then he went on to have special games with other people too. He had little associations he made up and all. And one of his favorite teams was the New York Giants. This is the Polo Grounds over in New York City. So he went over there many times, and he was a big follower of the New York Giants before they left the area on us. That's just stock footage. That's not anything there. Now, other recreational work that he did, the Nutley Field Club, which was on Tennis Place off of Nutley Avenue, he was involved over there. They would go from his house on Grand Avenue by horse and carriage and go over to the field club over there. There's archery there, dancing, card games, a little bit of everything. It was a very like country club, like a small country club basically. And that's an inside look of it. You know, they had a dance floor, piano, and a big fireplace. So those meetings were hung there. And the Speakers Club used to meet there, right? The Nutley Speakers Club met there at one time or another. And now we're going to just cover some of the things Dr. Philhower was involved with, because he had his hand in everything. And he was always on committees, and most of the time he was in a leadership position on the committees. So here he was involved with the decision of making Franklin, New Jersey, changing the name to Nutley, New Jersey. So he was there in 1902. He was on that committee. So he's like Mr. Franklin, Mr. Nutley. He overlapped that time period because he came here in like 1886. And it was here until 1935. But a lot of other big names there. We see the Simons, the Hayes, the Stagers, all the old Nutley names for those of you who do Nutley history. Now, we only have so far the Nutley Board of Ed, Ian there, has done a lot of scanning of yearbooks. There's an incredible website available now, nutleyarchives.org. And they have all the yearbooks are scanned in there, as many as they have, programs, graduation things. Not a lot of pictures, but a lot of print. So this we found is the graduation for his daughter. And how many people do you think were in the graduating class in 1908? Any guesses how big the class was? 40? Yeah. 105? Okay. There we see Louise Rowan Philhower. She had the essay. She was actually the valedictorian of the class. So brains ran in the family. And that's some of the things they did. But there's a graduating class. Okay. Then we have a Van Riper there, a Ryan, a Kranz, and that was it. Not everybody finished high school back in those days either, but it was a pretty small class compared to what we have now. It was like 525 when I was there. So now we're getting into the first reunion that they had. And the first reunion they had in Nutley. And again, Dr. Philhower was the president of the committee at the time. And this was their 200th anniversary of coming to the United States. They came over here in 1732, and they had it right here in Vincent Church. And we even have a group picture they took out front. There's about 150, 200 people all found their way here to Nutley. And think about 1932. A little harder to travel back then, you know, getting here by car, or by horse, or by train. So I give all those people credit. for coming here. And that's where we got the picture of Dr. Philhower in the front there. And this is just the new articles we found. So we like to go through it. And I think the Nutley, not the Vincent Church historians helped us out with this a little bit too. They had some background. But this is what hooked me up with the Philhower family reunion group, because I just went online to see if they still existed, and they did. They answered me, and I was actually out there 2 weeks ago speaking at their annual organizational meeting. So there's the doc again. Now, we're not sure, but we think that's his wife sitting next to him. We don't really know because there's no IDs on the picture anywhere, but we're hoping that that's her. And she'd be smaller stature, being on a horse person and all that. So we believe who else would sit next to him but his wife, we think. We don't know where his kids are. We can't identify them in the picture. We don't think they're all a little bit too old, the people on either side, to be his sons. So that's the church here where we are now, the original church that he was involved with. And we're going to talk about his involvement here at Vincent Church, because when you think of like a pillar of the community or a pillar of the church, Dr. Philhower is the definition of that. You look in the dictionary, his picture's there for pillar of the community or pillar of the church, because he was just so intensely involved in everything. And then we see the other part of the church with the new addition on the back. Not new, 1930, but the educational wing on the back section where we are now. That was all part of what he was involved with. We're going to cover that a little bit more in depth. So here's his timeline, because he was originally involved in the Vincent Church number 2, which was on Passaic Avenue down by Park Avenue. So that's where he first went to church. That was still in existence then. And then he became in 1902 the chairman of the search committee to find a new location. They wanted to move the church from that part of town up here to the center of town where there are more people and more visibility to grow the congregation. So in 1902, he was chairman of the search committee. And he found this beautiful piece of property that was a junkyard. It was used for a town dump. Originally, before that, it was a mill, a woolen mill, the Stitz mill. But he had a vision. He and the committee says, we can move all that junk out of there. It was all just rubble that had been tossed here. Think about it, we're downtown, and that's where the town dump was created. So I don't quite know why that happened, but they had the whole idea of cleaning it all out. This was called Elm Street out here back then, not Vincent Place. The original name was Elm Street. So he was involved then, and he got involved with the planning and the funding. And reading your book that you have, 10 Men in a Barn, just has so much information in it. And it talks about all that he did on a lot of the committees there. And the amount of mortgages that they had here in this church and the fundraising they did was just incredible. Mortgage after mortgage. And when they were originally starting to plan to build here, to get it open, the 1907 depression hit. Not as great as the 29, but the 1907 depression. So that kind of stopped things a little bit, and they went on. And by 1910, though, they kept going full speed ahead, and they were able to get the original church built. And then the educational wing got started to be planned in 1928, and Dr. Philhower was he was the chairman of that. And 1929, stock market crashes. And so now what are we going to do? Where are we going to get the money? But somehow, full speed ahead, and they also got the education wing open by 1930. He was a 40-year member here. 26 of those years was president of the Board of Trustees here, which is incredible that he stayed on top that whole time. And then, not to be outdone, he also, the parsonage that used to be over on Stewart and Grant, he engineered the finding of that, because the parsonage that was down on Park Avenue was too small, as they had married clergy and had families. They needed a much bigger place. So we engineered the buying of the house over there on Stewart Place, got a commission, but donated that back to the church, because that's the kind of guy he was. And he was, it was right across the street from him, so it was a very easy negotiation for him, I guess, to get involved with. That building's no longer there. That's been taken down, and 2 houses are built there now. Actually, we're looking for pictures for that. Somebody wants pictures. We're trying to find pictures of that house if somebody has them. The Follensbys must have pictures. I mean, they were there for a number of years. So.
Are not gone to their heavenly home.
No, but Dave, one of the sons was here last year at the concert, so I know they're around. Not Dave, but his son. I forget his son's name, but Andy. Yeah. So that's our window here, which was just recently restored by the members here. They had it parts of it sent out from time to time. That's the original window, though, from the 1930s. And it's a great room. We had a concert here. Some of you were here at that. We had a concert here a year and a half ago with Larry Hunt, and we had a good turnout for that. It's a beautiful piano here and good acoustics. Now, all these stories about Dr. Philhower almost never happened because he almost died in a drowning. He was at Green Pond in a rowboat with some family member and some neighbors, and the boat overturned, and they all went into the water, and 2 of the people were saved, and then one of the other persons grabbed onto him and pulled him down. As drowning people do, they pull you underwater sometimes. So he got pulled underwater with the son of one of the neighbors, and finally that person let go, and then Dr. Philhower popped up to the surface and was able to survive. But he came pretty close to not having, not being able to go on. So it took like 2 hours, but it's just one of those things. Now, he was involved in medical societies. Being a doctor, he was the first medical doctor in Nutley. The other doctor that was here was Dr. Van Riper. But he wasn't really a medical doctor. He was a fire department guy and very political in things. So he didn't do all that much doctoring in terms of medical things. And he was involved with tuberculosis. Now, remember, the time that he served here to be a medical doctor was all pre-vaccine. We had diphtheria, we had tuberculosis, we had flus, the flu epidemic in 1918. All those big things that occurred back then because we didn't have really hardly any vaccines at all back in those days. So he had to deal with a lot of things. One of his specialties, well, he had 2 specialties. Delivering babies, he was known for being extremely good at that, where the mother and the child always survived. He had a very, very high success rate with the babies. And pneumonia. And remember, a lot of lung diseases back in those days because people were, mold and mildew around and people worked in coal mines, all that. So he was a specialist in pneumonia. So when it came to any pulmonary problems, he was one of the guys in this whole area. In fact, he went to Texas even and gave seminars down there to the doctors group down in that area. And then he got on all the committees, and this was one of the, I like these stories, and I just show them not to go too much into the medical part because there's so much more that he did, but what he had to deal with and how history repeats itself. So this is the tuberculosis outbreak they had back around 1920, I think it was, and New York City wanted to put all the patients onto the Erie train and ship them to New Jersey, mixed in with all the other people, not even a separate like tuberculosis train, like just get on the train with all the other people. So Dr. Philhower had to go, whoa, and he's like, blocking the tracks, like, no, nobody's coming, through New Jersey on the train, that's infected with tuberculosis. I don't know where they were going to go when they got here, if there was institutions that they could go in for isolation or whatever, but so that was one of the big thing. And then we're just going to cover just a couple of the small little things, because remember, as a doctor, at that time, there was no EMTs or paramedics or ambulances coming to your house or any other doctors. He was the guy. So either he came to you or you went to him, or you were in the neighbor's house waiting for him to come by in his horse and buggy. So if there was a car accident of some type, like a wagon accident or whatever, he was the person who was there to patch you up, and then he'd get you going. And back then, there was a lot more accidents that occurred because of the trains and trolleys. And we had a lot of amputations occurred back then. People would fall off the train, or kids would fall in front of the train, and a lot of people would get injured that way. So he had to deal with a lot of that. But he also dealt with mental health. We had to deal with people who were suicidal. And this lady was going to attempt suicide, and he was able to talk her down and get her calmed down and give her what little medicine he gave out. Not much, but... And then he also was like a Quincy. Remember Quincy with Jack Klugman, that show where he was a medical examiner? So he had to research different programs that occurred in town in terms of deaths and sicknesses. And this involved the Kingsland family. And one of the Kingsland daughters was sick with diphtheria. And then they noticed that the dog was sick. And I tested the dog, and the dog had diphtheria. And they're like, well, that's not transmissible between dogs and people. So they figured out that there was a sandwich in the room, and the dog had gotten the girl's sandwich after she had taken a bite and got infected that way. So the girl recovered. The dog, of course, they had to put down. But and then Mayor Blum, that would be Ruth Bedford's grandfather. Did I get that right? Mary, I'm counting on you for that stuff. Okay, so he was one of the first mayors of Nutley under the Commission form of government. So he got overcome by gas one night. The city gas they used to have back then, the pilot lights would go out. It was very noxious, and it didn't have the smell we have now. So it was very easy to get overcome by gas back then. So he was overcome, and they were able to resuscitate him and save his life. I think the Dr. Cherishore, the original Dr. Cherishore, was involved in that too. And of course, when we look at all these different articles, they always make sure they put the ethnic part in there. That was big back then. So this one here, it's like right in the very first word, the Italians were in a knife fight, in Nutley. So this was over a woman. It was at a wedding, and Philhower had to go there and do some stitches on one of the guys. And that's where the fight was, over on Highfield Lane, in the middle of the street. Over on the left was the stores. There used to be some stores there, and meeting halls. And then just other little things. I'm not going to dwell on these, but how people got injured from different things, what they're doing in their house, whether working on their house. Here it's just interesting because it was a daughter and a father who both got hurt the same day at different incidents, and both ended up, having to go to the hospital. The wagons were big. Wagons overturned, the horse-drawn wagons. Horse would get out of control or get spooked. So he'd have to go there and then try to get the wagon off the people with help from people, and then he would have to provide whatever first aid the person needed. But he was a victim of crime. He had a coachman, the person that drove his carriage around for him, stole his checkbook one day and started writing checks. So they had to go find this guy and get the checkbook back and all that. So even though as popular as he was, and he took care of his help, he had live-in help that lived there, and he was good to his people. But for some reason, the coachman felt underpaid. Now, when it comes to prohibition, he was totally in favor of it. He believed that alcohol was one of the worst things you could put into your body, no matter what. He never prescribed it like they did at different times. So he was ready at any time. If you wanted to have a debate or a battle over prohibition and alcohol, he was ready. And he always would win his debates because he was so fiercely opposed to alcohol. So these are just some file pictures, for fun. Now, we talked before about vaccines, that there weren't a lot of vaccines around back then. So this is a speech that he gave in 1923, 100 years ago. Gave this at the middle school. It was a high school back then. And people were fighting the modern medicine that was coming out. So I interpret it as the anti-vaxxers were active even back then 100 years ago. They were fighting him on all this. So now he's just trying to promote modern medicine, for people and fighting, the crowds and all the information there. So he would go out. He gave a lot of speeches and a lot of addresses, but that was one of his ones that we found there. But he had fun too. He went to Yellowstone. He went to national parks. He went on tours there. And when he came back, he'd share his information. So we had a slideshow that he did at the school, at the high school, and he'd bring back 100 slides. And back then, he didn't have the great equipment. He had just little lanterns with a little kerosene lamp inside it. And that's what he had his show with. And he'd show Yellowstone in this particular show. And those are the slides. You can still buy them. They're on eBay if anybody wants to tinker with them. But that's that's the show, the materials that he used back then. Not the materials, just stuff like it. This one was just fun because it was the Sargent family was involved, the Gantner family, from Gantner's hardware store, and then Dr. Philhower. So just the kid got knocked off his bike, he didn't get hurt, and they just cared for him and then took him home. But just because it had like 3 big Nutley names in it. Where some of these are coming from, so there's a fellow, John Paul DeRosa, who lived over by Kingsland Park, and he's around my age, and he hooked up with me about 6 months ago. Just kind of out of the blue, he was watching me on Facebook. He goes, I did research on Dr. Philhower. I said, you did? I thought nobody did. Like, I'm amazed that somebody else, and he lives in Maine. So he goes, yeah, I got all these great articles. And he likes to kind of go with he likes going after the accidents, you know, and the gruesome stuff back then a little bit. So I just show these just to give us an idea. This was where a train, a locomotive coming through town hit a wagon of people going through Newark, and a number of people were killed on the wagon. It was actually at Washington and Park. That's not the train, it was an earlier version, but it was, you know, these are things like, you know, they had big time accidents back then, you know, with the trains. They weren't stopping because a horse was going across the railroad. You know, they just kept on coming. And even the doctor's own family had tragedy in it. So this was his cousin or his nephew, we're not sure which, lived in Newark, and his brother was running through Newark training for a foot race that was going to be in Nutley the next weekend. And he was on his bicycle, lost control somehow, and then got run over by a trolley. And then he just suffered some serious injuries from that. But they got a sketch of the trolley there with the bicycle all crashed up. They got the nurse that was there helping, and then they got a picture of the child there and before his injuries and stuff. One of the other things was down at the quarries, down on Park Avenue and Washington Avenue, the quarries were a big source of customers for him or patients for him also, because people were always getting hurt in the quarries. Dangerous place to work. Explosives they used all the time, almost every day. Big heavy things. Guys would get pinned under rocks, get their fingers pinched, get cuts, whatever. Some of the things are, that was when the quarries were active, and they were still active when he first started. They kind of closed down maybe around 1900 or so. But the quarries still provided a lot of accidents because people were swimming there, people would drown there, people would jump off, hit their head. A variety of things would occur. The quarries were unfenced, unprotected, so a lot of people saw those as opportunities to swim. The water was really cold, so as soon as you got in the water, your muscles would cramp up, and then people would drown there. So he got a lot of people he had to help from there too. And then this is almost like something out of a comedy movie, where these guys are down there looking at the explosives didn't go off. And so they had to go like over and look like what's going on here. They're like touching the wires, and it went off. And so then they got, again, they got the Italians got hurt. You know, they talk, but they don't name the Italians. They just name Perkins, who was the supervisor at the time. But he was, and he was in the fire department too. So and in the articles, they always said the person was not going to survive. And in almost every single article, the persons did survive. We found later on in life that they did recover from their injuries. Even he had to deal, there wasn't a lot of dentistry back then, so people would actually die from like a tooth infection. You know, would get into their mouth and get into their brain or wherever, into their body, and they could die from that. So he was dealing with so many different things. Now this is his baby, Nutley Memorial Park. And this is where he felt this was the life agenda that he had. I mean, the church was super important to him. He spent a lot of time here with all the organizations and being on different committees. But the Parkway, Memorial Parkway, was what he wanted to be involved with from day one. And this started around 1920. And this is the original map. Down on the left, on the bottom there, that's Town Hall. And then that's the Third River going through there. And then it goes all the way out to Kingsland Park to the waterfalls. So that was the original plan for Memorial Parkway, to go that whole length of the Third River and make it a memorial park where it would, for everybody who served in a war, that a tree or a bush or whatever would be planted in their memory. And they wanted to fill out the area, put parkways in there, paths, and make it a place that would be there to keep people in their memories. So he was, again, the leader of that. He was the president of that for a long time. And this is before Nutley had a real park commission, like a formal park commission. There was all a group of volunteers. These were all people, too, that worked. They didn't work for any enumeration at all. They were there strictly for the good of Nutley and Franklin back then. So Memorial Parkway, you see that sign, that's on Vreeland Avenue. We've seen that. And one of the things they had is various ways of fundraising. So this was one particular fundraiser where they had the boys of Nutley shaking down their dads, trying to get them to donate to and they wanted to make a pond for swimming and boating and fishing by the Kingsland Manor. They never got quite that far with it. But they kind of stopped at Passaic and Rutgers. That program started. Kingsland Park was a separate development. And just great artwork, you know, local artist. That's a pamphlet that John Demmer just found in the last 2 years. So the Memorial Parkway, and this is a bridge that's there, the Blum Bridge. Raymond Blum was Ruth Bedford's uncle, and he was killed in the Battle of Grand Prix in World War I, right at the end of the war. Actually, they had signed the settlement already, but he was killed after that. So this bridge was donated by the family, the Blum family, and Dr. Philhower was there to dedicate it. And they had him as president, and there were some other people involved. They had even had a chairman of seating, someone who was in charge of seating, because it was a big blowout event in the park there, where they had the Glee Club come in and had quite a bit going on there. He was the speaker, Dr. Philhower was the speaker. They had the Glee Club in Nutley, former mayors, sing-alongs with the audience. And that was the bridge back then in 1925. It's really different now, but that's the original dedication time. That's Vreeland Avenue is behind it. You're actually standing by the pond looking towards Vreeland, looking north, and that's a little footbridge. You see the railings are a little different there. It's where the river splits and goes under Vreeland. And it was much narrower back then. Even when I was a kid, it was very narrow, that bridge. So they widened it later on. So now this is an interesting story. And this is a watercolor by Virginia Bennett. And this came out of Ruth Bedford's home. Okay, and Mary over here, Grace, was very involved with offering that to me, and I jumped at the chance because I knew what bridge it was right away. It's a beautiful watercolor. There were 6 of these actually made by Virginia Bennett. We've located 3 of them. And we didn't know who V. Bennett was in the beginning, but I went online, I talked to one of my artist friends. She figured it out right away, put me in a chat room for the artist, and we were able to find family members of Virginia Bennett. We were able to hook up with them. So this picture has developed into all kinds of directions that it's done for us in terms of connecting to people and getting information. So this is a very important picture. And I thank you again publicly for letting me get that picture. It led to a book. So it turns out Virginia Bennett lived at Grant and Whitford in the old, where the church used to be. Grace Church used to be on the corner there, and they tore that down when they built the new ones on Highfield Lane. And the Bennetts built a house on top of that foundation. This is a book about Virginia Bennett, who grew up in Philadelphia, then moved to Nutley around 1900. And then Barbara Bennett, who was her daughter. And both of them wrote autobiographies. Actually, Simon Sear is in their book because he was a next-door neighbor to them for a while and played with Barbara Bennett. And a very talented family, artists, engineers, cowboys, inventors, artists. The amount of talent that was in this Bennett family is incredible. And I'm still in touch with some of the, I guess they'd be grandsons and great-grandsons now. They're still around the country. And this book just recently went back into print because the Oh Me part of it, the autobiography of a childhood, is growing up in Nutley from 1923 to 1940. And it's got all the different people, the stores, the old town Nutley, incredible stories in there, neighborhood stories, people are in the book. And it's just been, I've read it like 10 times already because it's just so much fun to read. And so Ivan Stiles, who is the holder of the copyright, just recently put this back available again on Amazon. So it's a great book. I'm not pushing a book, but if you're into a Nutley history book, this is a complement to Ann Troy's book and John Demmer's book and Peter's book, all the Nutley books that are about there. This is another one that has totally different information. And there's a ton of pictures in it from the family's album, so pictures that are nowhere else. So most of them are black and white. And then it covers a lot of their artwork too. And the husband, Virginia's husband, was a renowned artist. They went to Europe, and he has some really great paintings that he did over the years. So it's a wonderful family, and they were able to get that. So that's the bridge now. It's been reconstructed, but the tablet is still on there. On the right-hand side, you can't see it, where that was dedicated to Raymond Blum. And that's the bridge is at the other end, the west end of the pond, where the water enters in there. Bennett says that she designed that. So I have no way of proving or disproving that, but other than the book, she talks about designing that bridge. And there's not a lot of markers around for Dr. Philhower. So this marker is in Vreeland Avenue near the trestle. right? When you go there, there's like a little park area by the World War II monument and World War I monument, and that's one of the few plaques they've put up in his memory, because again, the parkway was his baby. And just some quick pictures. Most of you know the park really well, but this is where the park starts. I'm just going to go through these fast just to show, he was there every day when they were building this park out. He was there to make sure they were following the plans and getting it the way he wanted it, because it was his thing, and he wanted it to be perfect. And interestingly, he wanted it to be a memorial park. He didn't want it to become part of the recreational park system. He wanted to remain as a memorial park. We're doing okay with that. We'll see in a second or two. These are other walkways here. One of our little waterfalls there. The pond. You won't hear me call it the mud hole, because it's not a mud hole. It's a beautiful memorial park. This is a little further down, this Memorial Park 3 on Passaic Avenue, right in front of Yanacor School. So that's where the park ends. And then William Berg, he was so inspired by Dr. Philhower. He made a big contribution, about $50,000 to the parks. And they used that to put clocks on the public safety building and put a lot of dogwood trees in, were planted with the money that they had. He was a stockbroker, lived on Nutley Avenue. House is still there, actually. But we are still doing memorial things in that park. So this is the COVID garden that they built a couple of years ago. After COVID, we lost so many people. So they are keeping that memorial park theme going in the park, which I'm happy about. And even the veterans, and they had a stone that they've put in there too. The Garden Club did that one. And it's just the park again. So this was his thing. Can you guys read that? Okay. I'm going to let you read that. Okay, everybody got it?
Yeah.
Okay. So that was like what he wanted that park to be, and I think he got what he wanted with that. Now, the next thing he was involved with was the library. From finding the property to build it on, just like he found for the church. So we need a place to build a library. There was libraries scattered all around. We had a bookmobile that was horse-drawn. It was in people's homes, people's businesses. The library moved in a lot of different places, but this was when the Carnegie money was starting to become available. So Nutley was looking down the road, can we get some money for our own library? So he found the beautiful site across the street. Again, head of the committee. And they got $20,000, believe it or not, and they built most of the original library with $20,000. Things were so much cheaper back then. But that was all part of the mill property that they got from the Board of Ed. The Board of Ed actually owned that property, and they deeded that over to the town for the library. But he was there at the opening. They handed him the keys. He handed the keys over to the public. So he's the person, charter member of the library board. Now, this is my cold case. And I'm going to talk about it here because it involves here. So I have on my list of things that I want to find. And this involves going back to Virginia Bennett now. Remember we saw her painted the watercolor of the bridge. She did an oil painting, one of only 5 oil paintings she ever did of Dr. Philhower. It was commissioned by Mr. Simons. And the picture was either right there, over the fireplace, or in the boardroom. We have 2 different, maybe it was in both places, it got moved around. But it was hung there for many years. And then in 1946, one night, it disappeared and never been seen since. And the cops did a big investigation. It was like the theft of the Mona Lisa, in terms of Nutley and all that. So they got an insurance settlement for it. They got like $100 for the insurance settlement. And I've talked to a number of people to see just if it showed up somewhere. I talked to the Philhower group, the Bennett group, decide, if he knew he was here at the time. He was only around 20 at the time, so he was just a young child. But there was, other people that Simon's family I haven't been able to find. So I'm trying to find out. They don't know if it was stolen by an admirer or by someone who didn't like the painting and destroyed it. So we don't know if it exists. But it's on my lifelong achievement list to find that painting somewhere, if it's still around. There's a girl in California now from the Philhower group, because they're all over the country now, and she has some Philhower memorabilia, so I'm going to work on contacting her soon and see if she has any insight into that. Country Club, the Yantaquil Country Club, which is where the ITT property was, and where Cambridge Heights is, he was down there at the parties. These are all doctors just having fun. So one of the things, he always worked for free. He never got enumeration for anything that he did. He was always a volunteer. And the only things that he ever tried to get paid for was to run for commissioner. And he was never successful for some reason for that. He didn't have enough of that. He wasn't a political guy. He was he told you how things were. He was intellectual, he was caring, but he also told you where to get off if there was a problem. So we had that about him there. So he was kind of severe with people, and maybe that didn't play well in the political sphere, for him. So he tried to run. Actually, this was only a couple years before his death that he ran for commissioner unsuccessfully, and that provides another picture for us. So, if I could change the ending of this story, I would, because his story ends with, and it doesn't end because there's still so much that we enjoy today from his efforts 100 years ago, that what he did here in town, from the church here to the library, school board, the park system, all the things that he was involved with. But at the end, his health was starting to fail. He was around 70, and he was in a car accident, broke a femur, and it never healed properly, and then he developed a tumor. And he ended up spending the last 18 months of his life in the hospital. But he made the most of it. His wife and his daughter moved across the street. This is the St. Barnabas, as it was known down in back then in Newark St. Barnabas. So he lived there for the last 18 months, but he had 1,000 visitors came during the time he was there, because he was still a very popular guy. All the people that felt they were still wanted to do him, because he didn't, when it came to paying, if you were a patient and it came time to settle the bill, he was if he knew you were having financial problems, he'd go, don't worry about it. Pay me, when you get ahead a little bit. Sometimes he didn't get his money for 10 or 20 years, but he always got his money at some point. And back then, it was $2 for an office visit and $3 for a house call. And a lot of times you went to the office and he'd go, you're fine, just go home, take a break, take a rest, take a day off, drink some water. He was kind of like a low-key guy when it came to that. But if he knew there was something seriously wrong with you, he would pull all the stops and cure you and not worry about the money part of it. That was secondary to him. Wouldn't that be great if there were doctors like that now? Now, here's another thing that's on my things to find list. So this is a team ball from the New York Giants that was given to him 1 week before his death, somebody at the hospital. And he had all the doctors coming up and looking at it. And this is just it's not the ball, it's like an eBay picture. But it was a signed team ball from the New York Giants in the Polo Grounds. He had it in his room, all the doctors had to come up. It was the best thing he ever had in his life, he said, but right near his death. So so we're trying to find that too. That's just Yantaquil School. So this is, actually, we do go back to that. The reason I have this is Yantaquil School. That's Brookfield Avenue, and he liked the races too, because we used to have horse races on Washington Avenue years ago, Surrey races and horse races. That was a big thing on Sundays, and that was probably one of the racers there. So he would attend those with his wife. Remember, they were horse people. So this is the thing, that every time a position, the town got big enough and a town position became enumerated, or there's a salary involved, somebody else took the job. So even though he was like the park commissioner for 20 years, as soon as it became a paying job, somebody else got the job. So he never got it. He only got paid to be town physician, and then later on, I think he got 2 years as superintendent of parks. back in the 20s, right around the time that the Memorial Parkway was being built out, because there was so much money floating around, the politicians started getting envious and having more of an interest in the parks. So they were acquiring the land, but they weren't developing the land. So now that there was money involved, they all of a sudden took an interest and took over a lot of these organizations. So a lot of that, the volunteer work, the Blairs, were involved with that, and other, great family, Edgar Sargent, he was one of the Monsieur family. They were all involved with the parks and the garden clubs and all that. So his funeral was big. Actually, he laid in state right here in this room, for the afternoon after his death. And then, interestingly enough, the pastor from Grace Church officiated over the ceremony. I don't know quite what that was about, but it's in there. But he was, people came from all over. So, but one of the other things that he's done, he made sure that his resting place was proper too. He had a vision. He was looking down the road. So this is the cemetery, the Methodist cemetery on Passaic Avenue and Park, where the blinker light is. And he's buried there, along with his family. And this wall and this fence that we've all kind of driven by a million times and never really took notice of it is talked about in the 10 Men in a Barn book. And it turns out that there was a wooden fence there before. And this is where the church used to be, the Vincent Church. So Church 1 and 2 were in this area next to the cemetery. And they had a wooden fence around the graveyard there, and they wanted to jazz it up a little bit. So some members went to New York City, and they found this granite wall, and the iron fencing was coming down. It was being an area being redeveloped. So they negotiated to get that wall and the fence shipped over here by horse and carriage to the waterway, brought on barge, brought up the Sacred River to Park Avenue, and then brought up Park Avenue 1902. So they were moving up by horse and buggy. And so this is a beautiful granite stained wall, came out of Broadway over in New York City. Beautiful pillars on the side there. Two different types of fencing there, but still nice. We see the parsonage in the back. And there were gates on there at one time. And I think those gates are the ones that Simon Sears, they're restoring with the museum group, the Historical Society. They're restoring those gates. And that's the parsonage. And then, interestingly enough, there is a time capsule buried underneath one of those pillars also that has a lot of information. Right one. The right one. Okay, I won't talk to too many people. I won't get the details. But it's been there, since like 1902, 1903. There's a list in the book. There's a list of all the things that are in there, people's names and coins and different tokens, and it's quite an extensive little group of articles that are in there. So it's buried under one of the pillars. And then that's the headstone that's there for Hamilton Rohan. I'm going to go to the next slide. It'll show the dates better. But Hamilton Rohan Philhower was his son, who died at age 6. And I'm still waiting for the death certificate to come out. It hasn't come yet. But interestingly enough, Virginia Bennett across the street also lost a child around that same age. And he died from bovine encephalitis. That was before the days of milk being pasteurized and all that. So I'm not sure if that's what happened to Hamilton. It just covers where he was. We went through that. Another picture of him. And then over the library, there was we think we know what this is. This is a proclamation that was done by the Nutley Sun that has his whole life history on it, from day one and all the things that he was involved with, like a Reader's Digest version, so to speak, of his life. So the library had a copy of this that was very helpful in our research. And it was put in a leather binder, and we believe the person in California has that original. And this was his family. So he lived to age 72. His wife only went another year after he died to 67. And then Louise, the daughter, she made it to 78. Although Hamilton was 4, I said 6, he was actually 4. And then George B., I just started doing some research on him because he lived over on Maple Place in Nutley for a while. So we found his Visa card the other day with his picture on it. So we're going to maybe branch out to him. And then Emery I don't really know who Emery is. He doesn't show up in any other information that we have. So I'm trying, but he's on the headstone there, and he's the longest lived. But I don't know if he was a son or not, or just another relative. I don't know if Side knows that or not, who Emery was. No, okay. So the 1900 census, they did have one Irish servant, one Italian laborer, and then another Irish laborer in there, because they had horse people take care of the horses, take care of the property, to cook and all that. There was a lot of houses on Grand Avenue especially, where people had laborers or people living in the house, domestic help in the house back. Remember, we're going back to 19-teens, 1920s, a lot of money around back then, so people could afford to have household staff. And the houses were big. Oh, that's what we just found. That's him, that's George Bronson Philhower Jr., basically. And that was his going to Brazil. I actually had Luis decipher that for me the other day. So he was there for, we don't know exactly what for, it's just he was in profession. So we got a picture of him. And then this is just a recap of what he did. 23 years Board of Health, 23 years as town physician, 9 years on the Board of Education, 2 as president, 10 years on the library board, 15 years on the Nutley Memorial Parkway, and then he was on all the different medical associations in the area. But he was always like at the top. He was always like the chairman or vice chairman. And these are people that helped. Louise Bodick here, the Vincent historian, Carol Greengrove, Nick Van Dorn at the library, John Demmer, John Paul, that's the fellow from Maine that's got me a lot of information, Ian at the Board of Ed, the Philhower group, Leon, and then the Nutley Neighbors group. And then for those of you who want to follow more of what we do, this is where you'll find a lot of our stuff. Nutley Historical Society, their website has a lot of our videos and our articles we write. The library runs all our videos. We're on Facebook, so you can find us there. That's where we announce a lot of our things. But you can also get in touch with us and we put you on an email list. So that's the commercial. That's it. Okay. Does anybody have any questions at all? Or?
I have one question. Is Booth Park named after that Booth?
Yeah, the Booth family was a very prominent family way back. They were involved with the creation of the fire department, town government, very involved with the location of some of our schools, grammar schools that we have now. So they were a big family, extremely involved. Yeah. So they got a park named after them. And I'm not sure if that's, the county takes credit for part of that park. If you read the sign over on Center Street by the new bridge, it talks about that side of the bridge being developed by the county, and it does have a different look. It has different steps and different pathways, but the Nutley, I think, took over that park now. They just the Yanacall Park is the county park now.
Booths are in the cemetery.
The Booths in the cemetery? Okay, great. Okay. Yeah, that's an important cemetery. We're actually contemplating when we do our farmers market, John Demmer and I, we do walks in the farmers market in the summer, and we may make that one of our destinations. That's on our list of places to go because there's a lot of information there. There's a very, very old cemetery. In fact, the church was going to sell that off at one time. They were trying to get funding for this church, and they were going to try and sell the churchyard over there to make money, but nobody wanted to buy it. So I don't know why. Anything else? Okay.
So the cemetery property goes back to 1830, and the original church was on that property, and then the second church, as you mentioned.
Right.
But yeah, there are a number of notable Nutley folks there, and the plots go back to around 1870. So folks are welcome to go take a look over there. I also, since this is the women's meeting too, I wouldn't doubt that Dr. Philhower's wife was part of the Women's Society here at church, so that's pretty appropriate as well.
Yeah.
So we thank you, David, for coming and sharing with us.
Thank you for having me.
And, certainly feel free, right, to have some more refreshments.
Yes, please.
Yep.
Have some refreshments.